Greetings Louis, and welcome to another video. This past weekend was YCS Indianapolis, which was our first major event with Age of Overlord being legal. This particular event became a hurdle for a lot of duelists because when it comes to new set releases, if you didn't test prior to the set release, then you might be a little bit overwhelmed by the popular strategies or new strategies that are just unearthed by the new support that comes out in the set. We've already spoken about Age of Overlord for the past 2 weeks. If you've been keeping up, then you already know that this is a very strong set. It's a set that was going to shape the format in somehow, shape, or form. So there are a few things I haven't covered in this channel yet, at least when it comes to Age of Overlord, and those things did reflect on what happened on this past YCS, and I will cover it as we go along. So YCS Indianapolis had around 2K players in attendance, which is a really good standing for the past YCS events that we've had prior to this one. YCS Indy is, well, I guess Indianapolis as a whole is known for having a lot of player roster, and adding that with the excitement of a new set being released and the format like pretty much like being shaped up like in front of our eyes, this was a really good venue for a really good amount of players to show up, even if it was for casual or competitive like play. So we have a couple of things that we need to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is like we had a bunch of feature matches that were showcased, but the one feature match that stood out the most was this one right here. Basically, this was round 4 of the YCS. This is Jeff Leonard versus Justin Singh, and this is not the most. This is like not just the most eventful feature match we had in this YCS. I feel this is like one of the most historic events we're going to see in YGO history. The last time we've seen Exodia being being showcased like in a feature match was in 2012 with Jarrell Winston making it to top 8 with another Exodia strategy. We're in 2023, Age of Overlord just came out. There was no support for this theme, at least that we know of, and like Jeff Leonard resolved adding Exodia, all pieces of it, twice in one match. This was really cool to see. Like, for those who don't know, Justin Singh and Jeff Leonard are two really known players. Like, I might link Justin Singh's channel in the description. His name is Rampenguination. He does a lot of deck building theory. He does like a lot of YGO stuff. Like, he's being a really competitive player. He has helped a lot of players in the past who have topped YCS events and other events in the past. So like, not only did Exodia was summoned, it was summoned against like a really dedicated pro. And for those who don't know who Jeff Leonard is, this guy broke the internet already in the past, back when Mystic Mine was legal, like winning an event with a Mystic Mine centric deck, and now his reputation is going to be bolstered once again with this incredible feat. We had a lot of other cool feature matches. We saw Sprite, we saw Tearlaments, we saw Manadium, Unchained, Chimera, Bestial Horus with Red Dragon, Mikanko, Rescue Ace. So we had a lot of diversity in the room. Let's now talk about the top cut. Shoutouts to Duel Chronicles. I'll also link them in the description. They always do a really good job after YCS events, like just posting deck analysis and like trying to get as many deck lists as possible. That way people can just try to find whatever they need or want to see involving like deck types and deck strategies in order to like bolster them all together. So really good shoutouts to Duel Chronicles. I'm gonna keep using the website every time like these events happen because they do a really phenomenal job, and Yeah. So we are looking at top cut here right now. We see we have 12 Rescues, 4 Purelies, 3 Tier Elements, 2 Sprite variants, 1 which is Strike Brigade, 1 is Adventure. We also see Unchained, Manadium, and then we have others which are all like other decks that we know of, but they only have like one spot like in contention. So things to take note of. If you are familiar with the OCG format, this is looking very, very familiar to you. And if you don't know what that means, I will cover it and I will get to that point once I cover the deck list that topped this event. I firstly want to talk about Unchained. So prior to this event, Unchained was like one of the more dominant strategies in the metagame. Nothing in this deck got hit. Like Konami didn't outright do anything to the strategy, and like this strategy as a whole didn't like lose any cards. However, with Age of Overlord being released, as well as tier element like being known more in the format, Unchained started having a little bit of a shakeup because now they have other contenders they have to worry about. Those contenders are just as strong and just as resilient and just as advantageous as this strategy is. However, that does not mean that Unchained is out of the format just yet. In my personal opinion, I think Unchained is still really, really strong. It just needs to adapt to what the format is shaping up to be. And they can play a lot of tools in their arsenals that can just deal with other popular matchups that we have, like right here in contention. But yeah, at the moment, purely tier elements and rescue ace are really, really strong contenders to deal with, and probably Manadium to some extent as well. So now, if you are an Unchained player, you need to take care of those other matchups if you're going to keep playing your strategy. Let's talk about Manadium. Manadium had a fantastic showing this past weekend. The new support for Age of Overlord being Triloscuda as well as Visa Samsara really pushed the consistency of the strategy. It made it something really, really strong. In the past, Manadium always had a really incredibly high ceiling. I'd say out of all these decks that made Top Cut, it is like the strongest and most dangerous deck to face against whenever they set up their full board. It is the deck that is the hardest to beat whenever they reveal or release like everything in their arsenal. However, prior to Age of Overlord, the deck did lack a bit of consistency. Now with Samsara and with Triloscuda, they have proved to be very, very consistent at what they do. So shoutouts to Hani and Triff, like two really good players, two other Yugi content creators. They have done really, really strong like with this deck, and they, Hani made top 16, Triff made top 4. That just goes to show you that, yeah, this deck is going to be around. You're going to see it probably a lot more now, and if you're like going to take this format very seriously, you need to like be ready for Manadium. I was playing at a case tournament this past weekend, and I faced against two Manadium players, and they both destroyed me. Pretty much, even though my deck didn't have the most unfavorable matchup against them, I didn't have the right tools and the right cards to just handle the matchup, and I lost the dice roll against both times I faced the deck, so that's really, really rough for like the strategies that I've been playing so far. So, tier elements. A lot of players predicated on tier elements being like one of the more successful contenders, and this was exactly the case. The Chizu's cards are incredibly high impact. The deck can freely steal games if they mill the correct cards. It can even win against any matchup like at all if they like high roll into the right cards. One glaring weakness that tier limits does have is that a lot of people really anticipated the strategy. As you will see later with the deck list, you'll see that a lot of people already had a lot of main deck or side deck hate for Tear Elements. And you will later learn and know that there were other matchups that are just bad for Tear Elements that even made it to top cut. I'll give you like Exo Sister to just one example, which even made to top 8, as you will see here. But yeah, I'd say tier elements are not out of the room just yet. I say you still have to fear this deck, and you also have to really be prepared for them, because all these top spots that you see from Purely and Rescue Ace, they could have easily been on tier element's favor. It just comes down to like who or what can be prepared the most out of whatever decks you face. And yeah, other things to take away from this weekend. Okay, Purely. So even without SP Little Knight and Typhon being in their arsenal, Purely has enough tools to deal with all the contending decks post Age of Overlord. However, one really big problem for Purely right now is that Rescue Ace is a really bad matchup for them. Unless the Purely Street is on the board, the matchup is pretty much on Rescue Ace's favor. But once the Purely Street is being activated, it shifts to the opposite side, and Purely pretty much gets the advantage. I'll talk more about that when I get to the deck lists. But yeah, I think this deck is really strong. I think if not people play enough non-engine for the strategy and focus on the deck, you will just see Purely keep topping events left and right until that happens, or Konami decides to actually address the deck on a future ban list. But yeah, shoutouts to all the Purely players. This is a really good format for you. Okay, now let's talk about the star of the show. Let's talk about Rescue Ace. So I don't think this comes to a surprise to most people. This deck has been historically doing well over the past few YCSs. The main issue Rescue Ace had in its arsenal was that, at least prior to Age of Overlord, was that it was very inconsistent. It didn't play enough starters. Its main deck plays were very predictable, and it just folded by breaking between not seeing enough of their engine and seeing more non-engine to be complacent with the competition that you are facing. Now, with the release of the Sinful Spoil support, this deck is a lot more consistent into getting its main plays. Its engine is good enough to keep up with the other decks, since you have a way to keep the ball rolling. And in the end, it really doesn't have very bad matchups. Steven Santoli, who won the event, said on his deck profile that he had cards cited for Teal Elements, but ended up not even using them because he noticed that the deck itself really had enough tools to deal with whatever boards they were making. Moving forward, until the release of Valiant Smashers, which is the side set that will be released on November 17th, this deck will most likely keep dominating the format. It will still get enough top cuts. And another thing to note is, despite just receiving the Sinful Spoils as its main line of support, Rescue Ace has a lot of different lines. It can do 4 to 8 different end boards, which can deal with a little bit of whatever you're trying to do to contest their strategy. So it's going to be very tricky to handle this deck. This feels very similar to Kashtira back when Photon Hypernova was released, where the deck had a couple of cards that were dedicated to just deal with their end boards, but they just kept adapting and just playing the right cards or non-engine, or doing enough or doing the right plays to just avoid folding to some non-engine cards that people were citing in for the particular matchup. The deck is not unbeatable by any means. It just means that you just have to really adapt to it. And as far as all the decks that we are showcasing at the moment, this is the deck that is adaptive to like the other matchups the most. So you're most likely gonna see it topping the most. Now we're pretty much up to date with the OCG. Pretty much in the OCG, Rescue Ace has been a top contender for months now, and it was for a really, really good reason. And now you're seeing it. Okay, so let's talk about other decks that are topped but are not shown like in the pie chart. Like we have Sprite, we have Rika, we have Vanquish Soul, Flunderies, Labyrinth, Exo Sister, and I'll leave that Bestial Horus for last. So Sprite, I think with the release of SP Little Knight, I think Sprite variants are now like really good again. Back in the past format, Sprite was a little bit power crept. Its end boards were not strong enough to deal with stuff the opponent was doing. The deck pretty much lacked a lot of follow up. The banning of Sprite Elf and the semi-limit of Sprite Starter really just made the deck fold to like having a good grind game, which is an issue that it really just lacked. Now with the release of SP Little Knight, the deck has a stronger interaction against your opponent's board, meaning that you don't have to commit to your strategy a lot more than what you were already doing in the past. And it just will come down to like, can you just play well against like the decks that you need to adapt to. As you will see later, there were two variants of Sprite. The top one was an adventure build, and one was a build with the Tri-Brigades. I feel like it doesn't matter what Sprite variant you're playing. If you have like the Age of Overlord support, you should be doing fine against the decks on the format, because Sprite at the end of the day has a really strong engine. It can really craft through a lot of boards. It can really break through boards as well. We've seen that in the past with Think and Fam. But yeah, that's it for Sprite. Rika. So we're not in Europe. I guess that's the meme now. Basically, Rika is a really, really strong deck, but I think it doesn't adapt to every matchup. It does have a few weaknesses, and it just gets caught in the crossfire of like cards that are already good against other strategies that can just be good against the Rika deck. Vanquish Soul. Yeah, so before this event, I thought Vanquish Soul had a really strong chance of having at least multiple tops. I think Jiao Long is a card that really, really helps the strategy. I think the deck can do very, very well in an established metagame. I feel this comes down more to like not many players adapting to like what can Vanquish Soul do with enough of their cards. Vanquish Soul now plays a little bit more differently than it did in the past. So unless you were practicing with Vanquish Soul like in the past already, this is like going to be rough for you like moving forward. Flunderies. I don't need to talk about this one. I think this deck like pretty much can adapt itself into any format. I think it's only a matter of time until like they learn what to do. I will say this, the Rescue Ace matchup is not really favorable for birds, especially if they have to deal with multiple back row. They just like downright just freezes their strategy like more than not. So yeah, that's something they need to like take note of. But despite that, I think Flunderies can just adapt itself to the format later more than most. Labyrinth. So I think even with the release of Arias, like the Butler, Labyrinth did not change at all. Like what the deck can already do. Ash Blossom and Joy Spring is a really hard card for that deck to deal with. Like every time I play a Labyrinth deck, if I lose a match, it involved Ash Blossom and Joy Spring, or at least I think I might as well say it backwards. if Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is being used against me, it's a really rough time. And that deck is pretty much like, well, that card is pretty much on every deck, like in this format. So, yeah, if you see more counters to Labyrinth, you won't see Labyrinth doing as well. But if you don't face enough of those counters, then Labyrinth will just do very well. So, Exo Sister. So, we saw that this deck even made to top 8. A couple of weeks back, right when the September list happened, so we're talking about literally like a month ago, I brought up how Exo Sister was going to be a good deck even without support from Age of Overlord. I brought up that like Exo Sister is really, really strong as a strategy. It can adapt itself to the current matchups that we have, and if Tearlament ended up being a very popular deck during the weekend, then Exo Sister was just going to naturally do well at the event because it's pretty much a really strong deck against Tearlaments. Now, the last card last deck I want to talk about is the Bestial Horus deck. This is basically a Dragon Link hybrid, playing the Red Dragon Archfiend cards. So not only did this have a feature match, but it won its feature match and it even made it to top 16. I cannot say for sure if this is the way you play like Dragon Link moving forward. However, I feel like out of every strategy in the room, this was the deck choice that made the best use out of the Horus cards. I don't think Horus belongs in Tearlaments. I think Horus is really, really strong, like in other strategies that can just put up cards on the board that just forces your opponent to interact with them. And the Bestial Dragon Link deck is a really strong example of that, because imagine you're facing like a Dragon Link board. You see like a bestial monster, you see Branded Beast, Branded Regained, and you see like the Golden Sarcophagus. Like those are 3 different cards you have to deal with. And if you take anything out of Horus, is that Horus benefits out of your opponent interacting with your cards. So basically you're left with the choice of either A, dealing with your bestial cards that your opponent has on the board, or B, trying to get rid of them, but then you get punished by the Horus cards. And that's pretty much like what happened not only at the feature match, but it happened like all the way through Swiss and Top Cut. Now let's talk about decks that didn't top this event. I'll start with Dragon Link. Even though we just talked about the Bestial Horus deck, I feel like the other Dragon Link strategies that they not incorporated the Horus cards, they pretty much are caught in a crossfire of cards that are just really strong against like Tearlaments, are strong against like other graveyard center strategies, and just made it so like it just contests their deck as well. Chimera, the same thing as Branded. I think all those 3 decks they just folded to like the tech cards or tech choices that people were making just because of the fear of Tearlament dominating this weekend. Mekanko, we saw a Mekanko player like won its feature match. I think it was round 11 or round 10. And now with the Sinful Spoils as well as Gan and Ken, I think Mekanko is a really, really strong deck choice. Mekanko easily could have topped this event same way the other decks did. Out of the 3 strategies from Amazing Defenders, I think Mekanko became the weakest one, which is kind of ironic because when Amazing Defenders first arrived in January, Mekanko was the most sought after archetype, while Rescue Ace and Purely just like folded back in the back burner. Now it shifted like sideways. Now Mekanko is the one that's struggling to keep up. I still strongly believe Mekanko is really strong. I still think Mekanko is just as good as the other 2 strategies. It just comes down to like if enough players are dedicated to a strategy and can play it outright. Infernoble Knights is another deck that didn't top this event. I think Infernoble Knights are another strategy that we need to respect. It's one of the more popular, more powerful decks of the format. I think I'll put Infernoble Knights in second place after Vanadium as the deck of the format that can make them strongest in board. However, I think what came down to was more of like people already be prepared for Infernoble Knights. I still think you shouldn't be sleeping on that strategy. I think like that deck has enough means of doing just as well as all the other decks. But yeah, and the last one I want to talk about is like Mathmech or Cyber's deck. And you're probably thinking, why am I talking about Mathmech of all decks? Well, if people didn't know or didn't catch on, Mathmech actually did top Dortmund and it actually did top Cancun. It topped the last two YCSs. So I just wanted to bring it up because I feel like even though Cyber's decks are not like really popular, I feel like they still should be respected because they are a one card combo deck. They can play enough non-engine to just adapt to the format. They can play Small World, which is an incredibly strong card. And yeah. So let's cover a few of the deck lists that we see here. Here we have the first place list is Simon Santoli with his rescue spoil, I guess we can call it. One thing to take away from this list is he is playing enemy controller as well as Fed Veiler. I think other rescue players were also doing this. This is a really heads up move by him. I think enemy controller is going to be really strong this format because not only does it help you dodge against like the certain interactions that targets your cards, like for example the rescue traps, but also it has a lot of synergy with the Dark Witch because it not only does it make it so your Dark Witch can resolve, but whatever monster you end up taking with the enemy controller, you can end up just using it for the sinful spoils, like the Snake Eye spell, and that's just free fodder for your opponent that you just use to like start your strategy. I think both going first and second, this card's really strong as an interruption, at least against this current strategy or in this strategy specifically. Other things to take away is he is playing the Cyber's package. He said on his deck profile that the Cyber's package was really strong. He respected this package like one of the most. It's really strong because it avoids you getting evenly mashed. It avoids you like getting like power crept. Like it got a lot of cards that can just fold your strategy. So yeah, that's it for that. Other things to take away. He did side Dimension Shifter. He mainly said that was a contingency plan against Tier Elements, but you don't have to focus on that because, like he said on his deck profile, feel free, go ahead and check it out if you haven't. The deck is just strong enough against Tier that he really didn't need it to side deck. Another card to take away is Pancratops. You will see this in a couple of deck lists. I think a lot of people are citing this now. This card is really good. I think in established metagame like this one, this card can really shine, especially against Rescue Ace as well. It can bait a lot of their cards. It can just try to pick apart their board. Just to name one or two things. I guess we can talk about Spellbound. This card is here in the side deck. It's mainly here for Purely, but again, this goes back to why Chimera had a hard time like topping as well as Branded. This card is also really strong against both decks. So against any deck that can make SP Little Knight, this card is also strong. Against Unchained, this card is also really good. And I'll go as far to say, and I'll probably talk about this on another video, you should really start picking up Spellbound because not only is it good against current matchups on this format, it's also going to be future proof because once Centurion comes out next month, that is a strategy that you really have to focus on. Not many common hand traps hurt that deck, and that deck really hard loses to cards like Spellbound, just to name like one example. We see here another Sinful Spoils list. We see Super Poly and Talents in the main deck. Another thing to take away from it is, I guess we haven't talked about this part. They both play 2 SP Little Knights. I think you're going to see this a little bit more now. This is going to be a little bit more standard. Another talk we can talk about. Jet Synchron being part of the Rescue Ace deck. So there are pros and caveats to this. So the pros is you end on 2 Omni Negates, and you don't need to use as much of your extra deck as you do with the Cybers setup. However, this is more hungry with resources. Like, you're already going -1 for the Diabell Star package, and like going extra -1 for Jet Synchron, even though it makes a really strong board for you, sometimes it's just very risky, because if your opponent ends up like breaking your board and just contesting against your current cards, then you need to make sure that whatever follow-up you have for the next following turns is good enough to like keep up with whatever strategy you're facing if they end up breaking your board. So we see the 3rd place purely list. As I brought up before, this spell card right here next to Nibiru, the Purely Street, that card secures your Rescue Ace matchup as well as a few other matchups. However, if you don't resolve that card, the matchup is more on Rescue Ace's favor, because their interruptions are just going to overwhelm you. But yeah, this is just purely, it's pretty much the same as ever. You see SP Little Knight here in the side deck, in the extra deck. So yeah, that's just one thing to take note of. They're also playing Dimension Shifter as a contingency for tier. See, here we see Thrift Gaming's infamous Vanadium list. He already made a deck profile on his channel if you want to go see it. Yeah, Thrift was on this deck for the past couple of months now. The new support really strongly helps the strategy, and he demonstrated everybody in this weekend that, you know, this deck was no pushover. Like, he pretty much broke through the entire like spectrum. Sadly, he did break in top 4, and that made it so he couldn't win against like the eventual finalist, which was Logan. But prior to that, I think he went undefeated all the way through Swiss. I think he had 1 draw, if I'm not mistaken, and like maybe 1 loss. So yeah, like very, very strong. Like, yeah, be on lookout for this deck, because you will be seeing it a lot. This is typical Thrift behavior. Pretty much the whole side deck is just board breaking cards. He didn't believe in hand traps, pretty much, which was a very risky approach, because he could have easily just lost to like a Dark World player, or like the Exodia FTK that won round 4 if he lost the die roll. But yeah, outside of that, very phenomenal performance. This just goes to show you that you don't really necessarily have to win with hand traps in your deck. It just comes down to if you know what to do against certain matchups, and sometimes if you're lucky. When I say lucky, I mean against not facing the FTK type decks, because like if those decks are just very consistent, then there's really not much you can do without hand traps. Exo Sister, yeah, if you're a budget player, this is a really good thing for you. You do see SP Little Knight here in the extra deck, but if you see his deck profile, he pretty much said that this almost never came up. So you can easily just play this deck without SP Little Knight, and you should be perfectly fine. One really smart choice, and I think this was the smartest choice at the entire event, was Forbidden Lance being in his main deck. I think moving forward, you should consider Forbidden Lance as part of your deck, especially if Rescue Ace is going to be like one of the more popular decks in contention, as well as Unchained. And tier limits to some extent. we see here in the side deck, he sided like a lot of board breaking cards. He also main deck evenly mash. This was another smart move. I guess I should talk about, like, if the rescue player does not go towards like the multi omni negate setup, you can just break apart their board with evenly mashed, and they will have little to no follow up. If your strategy is just strong enough to just keep the crackback like in check. We see another Manadium list. This is Jahari's list. He's playing the A Hero Lives engine, and he is playing hand traps as opposed to Thrift, who was not playing hand traps and just opted to like max out on Samsara and the Scareclaw engine. I don't think there's a wrong approach to this. I think either way works for Manadium. So if you're a Manadium player, you have a lot of ways to choose. Shoutouts to Misael. He's like one of the Manadium players at my locals. He's been testing out like 11 different variants. And he was also one of my losses this past weekend at the case tourney. But yeah, we see more sinful spoils. This one's a little bit more interesting. This one played the Nemesis package. So for those who don't know what these cards do, Nemesis Flag is a pyro monster that can put back a monster that is banished back into the deck to add the Arch Nemesis Akatos. Arch Nemesis Akatos is basically what it does is you declare a type that's already on the board, you nuke every monster on the board that is of that same type, and your opponent cannot special summon monsters of that same type for the rest of the next turn. This card is incredibly strong against Unchained. If you resolve that card against Unchained, you pretty much just win the matchup. Same thing with Purely. I think if you solve that, if you like summon that monster against Purely, and you resolve this effect, you should be very secured for like winning the match. The way you just craft the Arch Nemesis into just handling your matchups is you just summon Reproducus, call whatever type you want, and just make the Akatos like nuke everything out of that type. So yeah, pretty much Purely, Manadium. I'd say even against Rescue Ace itself, this card is really strong. You can just call machines, and they cannot special Hydrant, they cannot special Turbulence, they cannot special Preventer. So that's already really strong. If the opposing player is playing the Jet Synchron package, they cannot summon that either. So yeah, even against the Rescue Mirror, this card is also really strong. But yeah, this was a very interesting take. The way you search the Nemesis Flag is by summoning Puzzle Amino and like crafting 2 level 4s to make the Infernal Flame Banshee. Which is a new card from Age of Overlord, if I haven't brought that up. It's basically Gear Gigantex for Pyros. Rigason Avalon, we've already seen this deck in the past. Just go to YCS Dortmund if you just want to know how to win. Chris LeBlanc, Purely, no surprise here. He is playing Book of Eclipse, which is another avenue to take into consideration. This card is really strong to just bait negates. So yeah. Labyrinth. I am a fan of this list. Basically, they main deck evenly mashed because they know that the deck is not really that strong going second. If you've been on my channel, you already know that I'm playing a hybrid with Unchained, and I use the Unchained cards to pretty much try to use that to break my opponent's board. But I feel like the evenly skill drain approach is not a bad one. You will see like in the side deck, he just has like a lot of other board breaking cards to consider. You see SP Little Knight in the extra deck. This deck can Fiend lock you if you activate Welcome Labyrinth, but outside of that, and I think Ariane, I think there are no other cards that just lock you out. Ariane is an interesting card being played in the main deck. Not many people play this in Labyrinth to begin with. I think in January, once transaction rollback shows up, I think this card is to be considered to be played in the deck. So yeah, like yeah, take Ariana into consideration if you're playing Labyrinth. I don't know if I will do it on my build, just because I feel like Ariana is just a good enough starter. And if I am playing the Unchained variant, which in theory you can say Ariana works in, but yeah, outside of just summoning Ariana, you pretty much don't want to summon anything else with this. You can summon Baguska, which is really strong, which is one option. You also have, I feel like this is one of the better decks that can play Typhon. We haven't talked about Typhon yet, but Typhon is another reason why you probably don't see Branded topping like this event. This card is incredibly strong against Branded. And it's pretty much accessible through any People's Extra deck. But yeah, that's another thing to take note of. We see more rescue. Here's the adventure sprite list. As you can see in this, right, you see SP Little Knight. You also see the Toad package with Arashima, as well as Swap Frog. This was almost power crept in the past, but I feel like it in this deck it makes a lot more sense because you are playing a heavier Nimble package. And now you can just pretty much like recycle half of your resources with Toad and just try to keep up with your opponent. This variant is incredibly strong if it goes first. It can put up a really insane board. Not as insane as Vanadium, but like a very respectable board that you just have to think about. And I'll say it. I think the adventure cards are not that bad this format. Just something to consider. The rescue package can deal with the rescue A spell and traps because they cannot target non-effect monsters. So that's a little small tip if you're like looking for options that are not rescue A's. We here see a tier elements list. As you can see here, you don't see any Horus cards. You don't see Visa Samsara either. The only real new thing that we see here is SP Little Knight. I don't think you need those cards in tier elements. I think tier elements as a whole is already strong enough. And Yuho just proved it, as well as Paulo, who even made the top 8. And here we see another purely list. Here we see the Tri Brigade sprite list. Yeah, pretty much. Like this is really cool. They are playing the Blackwing monster that came out in the Monster's Revenge. I spoke about this card in the past. This card is really cool. Basically, it is a level 2 extender that you can summon if you have Fenrir or something more than 2000 on board. It is a tri-beast type, so you can use it for your tri-brigades. And yeah, if you open this alongside Fenrir, you have the full sprite combo. So that's another thing to take note of. Yeah, like I'd say pretty strong. Very innovative. And again, it's just another deck that can abuse SP Little Knight. So yeah, like shout outs to Tri Brigade. We haven't seen that deck top in a long time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So in conclusion, this YCS showed that Age of Overlord did make an impact, but despite it being so, a lot of strategies are more than viable. We do have a top contender being Rescue Ace, which is something people will most likely enjoy seeing. Like for the past couple formats, we've been seeing like an unclear unanimous decision on what could be like one of the better decks in the format. I don't think Rescue Ace is strong enough to just gatekeep the format as a whole, but I think it's just strong enough for you to need to focus on it. Whether you're a casual player or competitive player, I think this holds true to everyone watching and listening. This game is as popular now as it has been on the past, and it will be very welcoming for players who really just want to play their strategies and that they enjoy the most. If you don't believe me, just look at Jeff. Like, he didn't win, he didn't top, but he did the single-handedly best thing that you could have expected out of this YCS, and is show that you can pretty much play a strategy that you love and do well with it. And sometimes it just takes one feature match to just be victorious, even if you didn't win the event. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I hope you found this informative. It is a very, very lengthy video because there was a lot I wanted to talk about. This is a really big YCS. This is basically a format changing YCS. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Until next time, keep practicing and keep doing.